Today we have several topics to talk about. Our panelists include Attorney Ernesto Borges, Rochelle Crump, Victor LaGroon, and Richard Brookshire. So we're going to have about 5 minutes each for each of those segments, and I'm going to turn it over first to our illustrious Attorney Ernesto Borges, but we're going to play a CNN audio clip first. This is about an Army vet accused of FBI of conspiring in the Capitol insurrection.
Don, it is striking just how many people are former veterans who are now accused of attacking the U.S. Capitol.
USA! They came to Washington trained in warfare, wearing combat gear, forming a line, marching up the Capitol steps, and then used their training against the U.S. Capitol. These three Americans are some of the first to face the most severe charges in the attack on the Capitol, including conspiracy, obstruction of an official proceeding, and violent entry or disorderly conduct. All three are U.S. veterans. 65-year-old Thomas Edward Caldwell served in the Navy. 50-year-old Donovan Ray Crowell is a former Marine. This is Crowell inside the Capitol building on January 6th.
Overran the Capitol. We're in the Capitol, bro.
The person who popped up behind him is Jessica Marie Watkins. She served in the Army as Jeremy David Watkins. On January 6th, the former Army veteran riled up her troops in person and on the social media site Parler. We stormed the Capitol today. Watkins is a member of the Oath Keepers, an extremist anti-government group. She also started her own self-styled militia in Ohio. We wanted to know more about these Americans now charged with attacking the democratic transfer of power they claim to support. So we went to their towns. Turns out, Watkins runs a bar with her partner in the village of Woodstock, Ohio.
I spoke with a neighbor who lives down the street from this bar who didn't want to be identified, but he told us that this is the watering hole for this town of about 300 people, and that when you would go in to get your beer, Watkins would often try to recruit you to her militia. He said most people didn't bite, but we know at least one person did because he was in D.C. with Watkins, and they were both arrested.
That person was Donovan Crowell, who lives just down the street from Watkins' bar.
I am her boyfriend. She is not a violent person.
Montana Sniff and Watkins run the bar. The two live upstairs where the FBI showed up last week.
The shots woke us up, and the yelling, because they were on a microphone yelling, "It is the FBI," and to come down. And it was crazy.
It was flashbangs, not gunshots. The blasted out window remains broken. Only Saniff was home and says he was questioned and released. Watkins later turned herself in.
What was her plan?
She was supposed to help protect some VIP members within the Trump rally.
There are people calling her a traitor. How would you describe her? Is that fair?
That is very much an unfair statement. She would never try to dismantle the Constitution.
So you don't see this as an insurrection or sedition?
It was illegal. And those people involved do need to take their lumps, but it's...
Including Miss Watkins?
For what? If she is found guilty of anything, then she will have to take the consequences of that.
Saniff also knows Crowell and says he joined Watkins' self-styled militia.
What's he like?
When drunk, the guy you want to shut up. When sober, the best man you could have.
Well, he came to the bar, so you saw him both drunk and sober.
That's how I got that barometer, and the militia was a good thing to help him be like it was a reason to be sober.
Crowell has been convicted in Ohio for drunk driving. His mother told CNN by phone that a couple years ago her son said they were going to take over the government if they tried to take Trump's presidency from him.
Fight for Trump!
His mother said she didn't think much of it until January 6th happened. About 400 miles away from Woodstock, Ohio, near Berryville, Virginia, is where Thomas Caldwell lives.
Every single in there is a traitor. Every single one!
That is Caldwell at the Capitol calling legislators the traitors. Caldwell was a delegate to the Clark County Republican Convention last year. In Washington, D.C., authorities say he was a co-conspirator with Crowell and Watkins in the assault on the Capitol.
I do not believe the charges of conspiracy are at all fair.
Now, it's unclear how Caldwell knew Crowell and Watkins, but according to federal prosecutors, they were all in Washington, D.C., and Watkins was using the Zello application on her phone to both communicate and plan the attack on the Capitol.
Wow, what a story. It's great to have both of you here, Richard and Victor. And we're going to talk about the Root article, Black Vets Weren't Surprised Military Members Stormed the Capitol. You are an exceptional writer, Richard. I read that article, and that was phenomenal. I loved the not only the eloquence of what you said, but how you said it. It was really powerful.
Thank you. Well, much more to come.
Yes, yes. So, who wants to lead in? But we'll talk about this whole issue. And I think it's really important for people to understand what you were saying in that article.
Yeah, I think Richard should lead.
Okay.
Okay. I try to encapsulate a lot in that article, right? I think kind of speaking from my own experience, speaking from the experience of so many other Black vets that I know, and then just generationally, I think that was one thing that didn't get explored as much is, like, this has been an issue for 50 years. This has been an issue for hundreds of years, really. But certainly since the military was integrated. And we don't often talk about it enough as a community. And I think because there's a growing distrust in police officers, that translates to a growing distrust in the idea of the military as an institution, right? And so, long story short, I wanted to encapsulate and kind of lay out a really sound encapsulation, of the state of racial affairs in the military, what's being done about it, calling the military to account, especially with the new Biden-Harris administration, making sure that they understand that this is a very important problem to address.
Yeah, and because we have now the Lloyd Austin is going to be our first confirmed African-American defense secretary, right? So that's really,
and that's great. But we've also had Barack Obama. We've had Black commander-in-chief.
Yeah.
Right?
Right, so we still need to have the boots on ground actually getting something done, right?
Absolutely, and it takes courage, and I think that is what I was trying to push, I think, in the piece overall.
Excellent. So what's your view on this, Victor? Because I know you are a combat veteran and really iconic yourself. One of the people I really look up to, too.
So it's interesting. Just like Richard said, this isn't a new issue. Right? This isn't our first time discovering this level of angst, this level of aggressive behavior, but also coupled with the racist undertone and blatant racism at this point. It's very abundantly clear that there has been systems in work that have allowed this culture to exist within our military community. And both on the active duty side as well as the National Guard and Reserve side. And, one of the things that I've often thought about is how do governors leverage the tag to ensure that they're rooting out this element in the National Guard, right? Even after the Capitol insurrection, we saw that National Guard members were being vetted and sent back to their home states because of their association with these groups, right? So even at a heightened level, we still see that this is still an issue that we haven't quite put our arms around. And to Richard's point, it's not enough to have a Black SecDef, right? It's not enough that we had a Black commander-in-chief because, to be honest with you, this isn't something that Black people own. We didn't create this element. We didn't cultivate it. We didn't allow it to exist within the military culture. And I don't want to use a broad paintbrush and say this is the entire military, right? But everyone within the military community knows that it exists, and we still haven't had the wherewithal to root it out. So that's where the work needs to happen.
It's kind of interesting because I remember during Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, there were some concerns about whether gang members from, neighborhood gangs would get involved. And they made sure that people took their tattoos off. And they, so there was a really concerted effort when it was actually looking at people of color about whether you should join the military or not. And this seems really strange that, we would go that far, even with people who just had a tattoo who had no gang affiliation whatsoever. You have to remove it. But to carry a flag into the sacred chambers of our Capitol is no big problem, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, right?
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we've even gone to the point now where people have been given waivers for tattoos that are inappropriate, swastikas, Confederate flags, 3%ers, and so on. So there's still some measure of tolerance because there are people in senior levels who share that ideology, who share some of those root behaviors as far as the belief system. People who don't see any issues with having bases still named after Confederate members, right? Clearly, we know that these people were not heroes. They were traitors against our nation, and yet we have not come to terms with having some cultural accountability around who we are as an organization and how we will move forward as a community.
Yes, and many of our military heroes who came back World War II, going back to Crispus Attucks' time, right, were mistreated in some form or fashion, another way. Some of them were lynched coming back from World War II. We had Vietnam veterans, although, in general they were all mistreated, especially the African-American veterans who came back, who really faced the brunt of criticism and, a lot of angst. And
could I say a few things?
Yes.
Because you brought up Vietnam. Vietnam, of course, I remember coming home in May of 1969, and the way that we were treated as Vietnam vets, and you came home, and it was best to just take your uniform off. And not that you weren't going to take it off anyway and go out and socialize and so forth, but we certainly weren't treated as returning or conquering heroes or anything of that nature. There's some things that bother me listening to these people chant USA, USA, as if we are not patriots, as if we do not believe in our country. And that is, it's upsetting to me. It's upsetting to see the tolerance they have. And I think that we should, and it bothers me that many black people don't trust the military or don't want to wear the uniform or don't believe in it. And the military, to me, was the best thing that ever happened to me, quite frankly, although I didn't want to go to Vietnam, and I went and served honorably and so forth. But I wish that we as a people would join and take a good, hard look at it and do a little more recruiting because when I look at the military today, I don't see enough black participation, involvement, enrollment. And there's so many benefits from having been a veteran, from going to get your shot or treatment or getting a check. There's so many things that are available to you, and it's shameful when I see people out there protesting, seditionists, calling themselves heroes, and that the rest of us are all traitors to some degree. So I wish that there'd be some outreach with the new administration insofar as getting more blacks involved. And just as we distrust the vaccine, many of us distrust the vaccine, I think that we need to open up the military and do what we can to make it more integrated, because I see it's not as integrated now as it was during the Vietnam conflict or war, and there's a lot of things that need to be fixed with the military.
Yeah. I'd love to interject there.
Sure.
One, I think black folk are actually overrepresented in the military. Black women serve at the highest rates of any gender, any race. But it's a problem of black folk being marginalized. When we talk about Vietnam, there was an overrepresentation of black folk because they know that they were ripping them from inner city ghettos and throwing them with rifles, into the jungles of Vietnam to fight, a war that didn't make sense. And one point that I thought was important to make is just an observation, is that it feels like what's happening right now is a repeat of history in some ways. So we had, after the Civil War, Reconstruction, right? And I look at how the Reagan years and the Clinton years destroyed the black community, and then Obama's even into the Bush years, right? And the Bush years planted the seeds for what we see now, very, very much, because he lied into a conflict that, it's the forever war, right? And the amount of gold and treasures that the country has had to expend to maintain those conflicts is, those could have gone toward all manner of things in America. And you had the Obama years, which were supposed to be a rebuild, a recompense, a coming to terms, a reckoning, right, for the country. And then there's this swift backlash. But the seeds have been there. The seeds have always been there. And now they're organizing. They're organizing internationally. They're definitely organizing, amongst themselves. And the military has to take that seriously. And they can't have the same failures of Reconstruction happening in 2021.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because Ernesto, but Attorney Ernesto Borges, the illustrious one, he is a phenomenal attorney. I listen to his show every Sunday morning, too. I was supposed to call you after your last show because I thought it was really particularly good. But there's a Military Times article that you're aware of that, can the Pentagon prosecute military retirees under the UCMJ? And I think that really is a very important question, especially now, because a lot of these veterans who came forward, as was noted by Richard in his article, about 1/5 of them were military veterans. So that's disturbing, and the issue is whether or not the UCMJ applies to veterans. And I did not know that a person who had retired from the services, armed services, could in fact be prosecuted by NCIS and others. That's astounding to me, and I don't know whether that's the right course of action to take to be able to for the military to still have some jurisdiction over people who commit crimes that have retired from the military. And it was really surprising to me. I did not know that was the case. And they have certainly different categories. If you retired from the National Guard or something, or it doesn't apply to you and there's no jurisdiction over you. But if you retired from the regular active duty, then and that's the Uniform Code of Military Justice for those people who don't know what we're talking about. But it's surprising that it still applies to, and I think that I somewhat disagree, because can you take a person who's out of the military who has committed an offense? Should the military judge them, or should they be judged by a jury of their peers and civilian courts? So that's a little problematic for me. But that's interesting, Attorney Borges. Because I'm wondering, with that, are they still liable for criminal penalties, right? And in the regular court system, or is it just going to be under the jurisdiction of the? Because it seems like it looks as if I don't see where both could be trying. I mean, how can you try somebody? Let's say you commit a crime and you're found not guilty in one court and then guilty in the other, or vice versa. Right. So it's a little problematic to me to have two different courts having jurisdiction over, say, one criminal offense. Although we do have, civil penalties and so forth, but I think they're going to have to revisit that and do away with it, because trying a veteran who's been out for 10 years and you're saying he's still under the jurisdiction of the military, I think to me does not make sense. But it doesn't, because you're not being you're not being penalized for your involvement in military affairs or actions that they're asking you to do. You're actually being tried about insurrection against the government and against the people of this country. But
I think that also that's true. But I also think that if they're still eligible, like officers, when they retire, they can still wear the uniform. And so I think it has a lot to do with code of conduct when, in fact, you're in that position and you're representing yourself as part of the military. Then why would you support that? Right. But most people are not officers. Most members of the military are not officers. And, you're a sergeant or sergeant major, whatever, and you retire. You've been retired for 10 years. You committed an offense, and you should be.
I think the military should have the right. I think the military should have the right to strip you of your benefits if they don't have the right to prosecute you. Certainly is what.
Under certain circumstances. I think that there's also some confusion.
Absolutely,
right. There's also some confusion as to, based on the federal statutes, because this is very new ground for us. We've never seen this before, right? So I don't want to confuse people who don't understand that. For example, Colonel Honor, the president could call you back to service, right?
Right. Yes.
Right. As a commissioned officer. You can be called back at any given time because you're technically never not a part of the military when you are a commissioned officer. So those and there were quite a few commissioned officers who were retired, and some were on the reserve or guard duty as well. They absolutely should be penalized and disciplined under UCMJ. Those who were on the enlisted side, who may have been, veterans and served and so forth, can and probably will be stripped of their benefits because they have committed federal crimes against the government. Yeah. So not to confuse people and conflate the issue, because it is kind of difficult to explain how UCMJ is a standalone justice system. You don't have the same threshold for guilt or innocence. You don't have the same threshold for proving your innocence either. So it's important that we understand that this is a very different discussion. And I think the only thing we really can lean back on is similar would be Timothy McVeigh and his actions. And that's still separate because he was enlisted, and I think he was in the Guard. So we're going to see a lot of legal discussion about this. We're also going to see that the federal government is going to do what it's going to do under, I can't remember what the Patriot Act is renamed of, but there are some other legislative actions that they could take because of the ability of the DOJ and Homeland Security.
Yes, and Rochelle was on here to talk about Lloyd Austin, the general who is now the current confirmed as the defense secretary. So there's a lot of weight being placed on people. One of our people who's on our board we're so proud of was actually called in by Nancy Pelosi, and that's Colonel, General. I'm sorry.
General Honore.
Yeah, General Honore. And he actually is, working with the Capitol Police situation, all those kinds of things. And we really need to be focused on this because it's a time for transformation.